All right. Well, when it comes to getting turned down on your worship team, no one is getting more attention than the drummer. So let's stop fighting each other and work together. Well, hey everybody, this is Stephen Reed from Music and Ministry back again in our deep dive into how to not get turned down on your worship team, because it happens all the time where you look up there and you see people giving their all for Jesus, but yet you cannot hear what it is that you see. And we've been talking a lot about that. And today we're going to jump into a new part of the series. And so we kind of have like a series within our series where we're going to talk about specific instruments. And I'm going to go through and just talk about the drums today. Now, if you're thinking, well, I don't play the drums, I don't need to listen to this, that is not true, because we need to be able to work together. And so I encourage you, stick with me. If you're a worship leader, if you're a vocalist, if you're the sound person, for sure, because all of this stuff works together. And part of the reason why things get turned down is we're not working together. And then we put ourselves in our bad systems, which we've been talking a lot about. And so we need people, other people in the group, to help bring us out of those bad systems and to connect us with reality. So one of the biggest things right off the bat is that we have to talk about is that we group a bunch of individual instruments together and call them the drums. And it's, a drum set, a drum kit, whatever you want to call it. But we've got the cymbals, which are usually up top, the, big pieces of metal that you hit. You've got the tom-toms, which are the round drums that usually there's 3, sometimes there's 2, sometimes there's 4. You got a variety of options there. And then you also have the snare drum. And the snare drum usually has a different coating on it. And it's got the little raspy pieces of metal on the bottom, gives it unique sound. And then you've got the kick drum. And then some people, you would call the hi-hat its own thing as well, which is 2 cymbals stacked on top of each other. So a lot of times people are like, well, the drums are too loud. Well, which drum are we talking about? Because they're not all connected. They're all separate things that are being played by one person usually. And so a lot of times what will happen, the reason why people get turned down, or all the drums will get turned down, is that only one part of that is being played at the wrong volume. And so as we've been talking about, there are 3 things that you have to do. We're talking about all 3 of them today. Playing the right part at the right time with the right sound. And so a lot of the time, we see drummers playing, they are playing the right part or close to the right part at the right time. They're in rhythm, but they're not playing with the right sound, meaning that part of their instrument is out of balance, meaning they're playing certain parts of the drum set too loudly and other parts not loud enough. And so what I would encourage you to do is to go and listen to the recordings that it is that we like so much. And specifically, if you're going and listening to multi-tracks, go and listen to what the drums sound like. And now, again, I've been saying this all the time, live recordings are not live. They have been taken back and re-recorded and done heavily processed kind of things to them. And so it's not exactly possible to do what it is that they've done. That's why they have to go back and re-record them, because a live drummer can't do it. It doesn't sound good. But we can learn from that, and we can get as close as we can to that. And depending on how much technology we have, like we've been talking about, but we can also just play like that. And so I wanted to play just a small snippet from some of the major recordings that you have heard. And I want you to pay attention to what it is that you hear. And if you were to rank, and I will sometimes have my students do this, or if I'm in a seminar, we'll do this, and I will say, from a scale of 0 to 10, how loud is the kick drum? From a scale of 0 to 10, how loud is the hi-hat and the snare and the toms and the cymbals? And then you would kind of just make this rating, say, okay, what can we hear? So let's just take a listen real quick. All right, did you hear that? What did you hear? And again, how much of the kick drum, how much of the snare, how much of the tom? Okay, let's do one more. All right, now this is a recording. This has gone back. This has been through a lot of processes, possibly not even a human drummer, because they do it with MIDI and oversampling, and all kinds of things have been fixed and enhanced in so many ways. But this is the sound that we like. When we play our recordings, when we listen to them, we're like, yes, that sounds right. And so one thing, if I can help all you drummers out there, you need to learn how to play the drums so that they sound like that without having all of the cages and the studios and the special microphones and the processing and the oversampling and all the things that we can maybe do portions of in a live environment, but so much of it cannot be done when we're adapting from our recordings to our live environments, that we need to learn how to play the drums so they sound like that. And one of the biggest reasons, and hopefully you noticed it, is that they're not hitting the cymbals as much or as hard as most people play the drums. And so when you watch the drummer, and even if you went to the live recording of the tracks that I just played for you, you're going to see a drummer just giving it and just whacking the snot out of all the stuff. But then when you go back and listen to it, you're going to hear something very different from the style of music that they were playing. And that's because they don't tell you that they go back later and they re-record those drums. And so what that drummer was doing with all the hitting didn't sound good, wouldn't work for the recording. And so they scrubbed it all and said, hey, let's do it a different way. All right, now if you don't know that, that means that you're ignorant, right? So that was one of our 6 things of why people aren't going to get these things figured out. And so you just think, oh, I watched the video, that's how he's playing, I should play like that as well. You're aspiring to be like that, but then you don't know that that's being replaced. All right, so here we are getting enlightened and educated. So we have to learn how to play the drums without playing the cymbals so loud, because what most of the time happens is that the drummer will start hitting the cymbals super loud. Whoever the people are, sometimes the sound person doesn't know how to turn down just the cymbals, or you're not in an environment where that's really possible. And so then everything gets put down because then the cymbals are too loud. And so then that's where people ended up getting put in a cage, right? Not because the drums are so loud, too loud, but because the cymbals are too loud. And there's a lot that we can do to know how to just not play with as hard on the cymbals. And so you have to learn how to not play as hard with your right hand, but with your left hand, play hard, because the snare is supposed to be really loud. And so the other thing we can do with our cymbals is that we can choose different cymbals. A lot of people have cymbals that only sound good when they're played hard. And so one of the things we do is we have cymbals that sound good when you just barely hit it. Because part of the reason why we're doing that is we want this particular sound. We're playing for a sound, and when we get that sound, that's how hard we play. And certainly it is also fun to play hard. So I get that. You have to learn how to not do that as well and enjoy making good sound, or taking that energy that you're putting into your right hand and put it into your left hand. And so you need to set up all of the drums, but specifically the cymbals, to where it sounds good at the appropriate volume for the area that you're playing in. All right. The other thing that we can do, or that we just need to keep in mind, is that when we play the cymbals really loud, it prevents the overhead mics or other microphones from doing a good job at picking up the rest of the kit. And so by us playing our cymbals so loud, it makes the rest of our drum set not sound as good because we can't use them in the same way. So it's a big deal. And I spend so much time working with drummers to just get them to not play the cymbals so loud, and then it will be much better and you will stay much more in the mix, or would potentially even get out of the cage. And I know that that sounds crazy and dangerous and ludicrous, but I'm telling you, I've done it. I've done it with kids. I've done it with teenagers. I've done it with adults. It's totally possible. I mean, here in Nashville, that is the expectation. Very few places have a cage of any kind, or maybe they'll have a few pieces of some shield to reflect a few things, but it's around here, you're expected to be able to play without a cage. And so I know that's not the norm in the rest of the world, but here, everywhere you go, that's what it is. So, and I'm not saying you have to do it. I'm just saying, what if, all right? A dream world where drummers weren't inside of a cage at every church across the United States of America. That'd be amazing. All right. So when you're listening to that recording, you'll also notice that the snare drum is really loud. Right? The kick drum is really loud. You will also notice the hi-hat is almost undetectable. And so you got so much happening with your right hand with a hi-hat and with the cymbals that we forget to focus on our left hand, that snare, and then on our kick drum. And for the most part in our modern praise and worship music, that's what we're looking for, is we're looking for the kick and the snare, and it to be fairly loud. Pretty famous executive producer here in town once told me, the snare drum should be as loud as the vocalist. And I was like, that is nuts. And then I went and started listening to lots of recordings, and sure enough, the snare drum is not always, but a lot of times will be equally as loud as the main vocalist. And you would think that's crazy at your church or my church, right? Because if we give that much volume to the snare drum, all of a sudden it doesn't sound right. And that's not because it's too loud. It's actually because the drummer is breaking rule number one, which is they are not playing the right part. So when we give our drummers that much power to make that much sound, we have to then make sure that they're playing the right part. And what drummers do, we do this all the time. It's rare to meet a drummer who doesn't, is we take these parts that we hear and we kind of play them and we'll add our own little flavor to them. And so what happens in that is that if we give them the right amount of volume that it should have for the song, when we hit our notes in time at the right part, well, then it sounds great. But when we add something where we're not supposed to be adding something, even if the sound is good, even if it's in time in the sense of it's in rhythm, if it's hitting where it's not supposed to be orchestrationally, meaning it's covering up some other instrument, or it's hitting someplace where a vocalist is singing, well, now it sounds busy, and we don't know the difference between busy and loud. And I'll say that again because that's a major point. We can't tell the difference between too busy and too loud. And so as a result, nobody says anything, or people don't have the authority to say anything. And so the sound person can't raise his hand or her hand and say, hey, you're getting a little busy on the snare. We're gonna have to clean that up, or I'm gonna have to turn you down. But what just happens is they just get turned down, and then they get left down because they can't be trusted to play the right part where it's supposed to be. And then if they did, they would give them that full volume. So it is a huge deal, and I cannot overemphasize this enough, and I realize that most people are pretty ignorant about this, but drums come super early in the recording process. And so they're really the first thing. And then if a live recording, if they keep anything from the actual recording event, there is some chance that they might keep the drums, and then they build everything else that they're doing around that drum part. And they will even sometimes still go in and cut out certain parts where they hit a drum or something and they didn't like it, and they'll just edit that out. Now, we don't have that ability in our live setting because it's just passing by. And so we have to be concerned about, where are you playing? Is that the right part for the right moment? And that also happens quite a bit on the toms. And so people will just add in a drum fill where there's not really supposed to be a drum fill. And then again, it sounds busy. It's not loud per se as much as it's just the wrong part. And so I would encourage everybody on the worship team, especially drummers, listen to exactly what they played on the recording and do only that, if not less than that. Now, that's going to run right into our sixth reason, which is unwillingness, for those of you that remember all six of them. That's because sometimes drummers don't want to do that because it's less fun. And so I will often work with drummers like, you have to understand, like when you play the right part, we're going to give you this huge wall of sound. It's going to be great. Right now, you're up there waving your arms around and you can hear it in your headphones, but we're turning you off at the soundboard or cutting parts of you off, and it's not making it out to the soundboard. And you look like you're just wailing away inside of your cage, but we can't hear you. It's not a good look for drummers, all right? And so again, that is one of the major parts of the drumming. How do we get out of this? Is you have to focus on what that part is, but you also have to create an environment where drumming the right way gets the sound that we're looking for. And so you have to adjust your in-ears if you are set on having to use in-ears to where you can hear the cymbals, because what most people do is they get their personal mix and they're going to take how they're playing the drums and they're going to make it sound as good as they can to them with their own mix. So rather than adjusting their playing, they're adjusting their mix, all right? And so what will happen with sound people is they have no control over that mix. And it used to be back in the day, you could help a drummer not play the cymbals so loud by turning up the cymbals in their in-ears, and then all of a sudden they would not hit them so loud. But because most drummers turn the cymbals way down, they then make it to where when they full mash on the cymbals, it sounds right to their ears. And part of that, again, you just have to realize everybody's playing or doing what they think sounds good. And so just saying, hey, that doesn't sound good, you have to help them hear it, help them see it. And so there's a lot of things I could do to talk about that maybe another day, but it takes some intention to get rid of that. I'm going to say something radical here, but what we do is we do not give our drummer headphones. We don't give them a monitor at all. Because if they can't hear, that means that they're playing too loud. So rather than allowing them full control over a wedge, full control over the in-ears, if you give them that, they're going to play louder. If you put them inside of a cage, they are going to play louder still because they believe that it's soundproof. And most drum cages are not soundproof. And even if they are, they don't understand that it could sound a whole lot better if they just played a little differently. All right, so we need to put our people in a good system that will allow them to play what everybody else agrees that sounds good, and we need to help them understand that it sounds good as well. All right, so we're covering a lot of ground, but we're still not done. Okay, well, I've already mentioned it a few times, but one of the major things is setting up the drum set to sound good at the right volume. And so I talked a little bit about having cymbals that sound good when you hit them light. It's also important to have your toms be set up to where they sound good when you hit them lightly. And so part of that is going to be your drum head selection. And I cannot tell you how many times we have gone to churches where they're trying to bring the sound of the drum set down by muffling then the toms or muffling the kick drum in some way. And so what ends up happening is that instead of the drum set sounding good at a low volume, now you have to really hit it hard in order for it to sound even okay. And I have gone to so many churches where we've ended up replacing the drum heads because they have like a 2-ply with an oil sort of like component in the middle of it that deadens the drums quite a bit. And so then all you get is this whack sound instead of this real boom sound that we're kind of looking for. And so I would encourage you to spend a lot of time learning how to tune your toms, which most drummers don't know how to do. It makes a huge difference. Again, being able to tell the difference between it's too loud versus it doesn't sound good. And then we also have to then, like as we've been talking about, don't play the toms all the time. And then specifically when you're playing the toms during a verse or when they're singing, don't play them as loud as you would. You have to make sure that you're serving the vocal and bringing down your own volume, or potentially choosing a different part because you don't want to do anything that would inhibit the vocals. Again, from our stereo, we can put the toms over here and our vocals in the middle, to our mono where we have everything laying over the top of each other. All right, the other thing that I sometimes see people do is that they will use different kinds of sticks in order to bring the volume down. And sometimes that will be in the form of plastic sticks, or you'll have the little dowel rods that are taped together. And the major problem with that is that it changes the sound. Now, certainly, is it less loud? Yeah, a little bit, but it's not equally less loud, meaning that the low end part of the sound goes away dramatically. And so what you're left with is this kind of wacky sound where it's real high and all you're hearing is the thump of the stick hitting the drum head, and you're not getting the boom from the weight, the mass of the stick that you're using to hit it. And so I would encourage you to use real sticks, but set it up to where you can still get the boom that you're looking for without having to use so much force. All right, so I just said a bunch of stuff that you're probably like, Steve, that's the craziest information I've ever heard, or nobody does it like that. And I'm telling you that it is the way forward, and that you can get unstuck and you can get things put in the right place. All right, so again, you need to make sure that you learn how to not hit the cymbals, that you're not saying the drums, everything. If somebody says, hey, the drums were too loud, ask them which part of the drums were too loud. And if they don't know, and some people just can't tell the difference, it's probably going to be the cymbals. And the next step is going to probably be the toms, because they're playing too busy in some sections. So again, if you play the toms in a busy section, they're going to get turned down. They may or may not get turned back up. That's not a good place to be. If it was the snare, most of the time it's because they were playing too busy. And so then you have to look at, okay, what's the part that it is that you're playing? And then make sure that you're using real sticks. Make sure that you set up your drum kit in a way that it sounds good at a low volume. And then the last thing is you have to make sure that you're putting your drummer in an environment where they can hear the right part sounds right to them versus the wrong part sounding right to them. And that will make a huge difference for you. And we've done it. We've seen it. I believe it can be done. If you have any questions, drop them in the comment section. I'm sure there are probably some, and we'll in the future try to go over some more of these things. But for today, that's a lot to think about, and it's hopefully going to change the life of your church and of your drummer. So until next time, everybody, God bless.